everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode. We often look to a new president's first 100 days as a kind of, well, a bellwether, don't we?
Yeah, it really goes back to FDR, the New Deal. That intense period sort of set the benchmark.
Exactly. It's seen as this crucial window for, setting the tone, pushing key policies.
That's right. And while, 100 days is maybe a bit arbitrary as a measure, it does give you a really concentrated snapshot.
Yeah.
You see their immediate priorities, their governing style, how fast they can move. It definitely hints at what's coming.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into precisely that, the first 100 days of President Trump's second term. And the sheer volume of action has been pretty remarkable.
It really has.
We're talking about over 140 executive orders signed. That's a record for this early stage, right? It's been a real flurry.
It is a significant number, yeah. It underscores a very clear strategy, using that executive authority to push the agenda through quickly.
Bypassing Congress, essentially.
In many cases, yes. It allows for speed, but it also, brings up those big questions about the reach of presidential power.
Exactly. So our goal today is to unpack the biggest actions, look at their initial effects across different areas. We're pulling from, multiple news sources, a recent poll, just trying to get a clear picture of the administration's priorities and, well, the reactions they've stirred up.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get into it then. One of the first things that really strikes you is just the speed. Some have called it a breakneck speed and chaotic rollout of the agenda.
That feeling of rapid, almost overwhelming activity is definitely a key feature here. You get the sense of a deliberate push to reshape the policy landscape very, very quickly.
And looking at where these executive orders are focused, two main areas really pop: immigration and border security, and then energy and trade. Seems like those are top of the list.
Yeah, those absolutely align with the core themes from his first term and his campaign promises, too. It's clearly a continuation, maybe even an intensification of those priorities.
Now, one specific executive order that's gotten a lot of attention is the reinstatement of Schedule F in the accepted service. This is the one that could potentially strip job protections for, well, a lot of career civil servants.
Right.
What's the administration's thinking behind this?
Well, the argument from the administration is that it's about accountability. They claim, that some career employees have resisted or maybe even undermined the executive branch's policies.
So the idea is to make it easier to remove people they see as obstacles.
Essentially, yes. To remove individuals perceived as hindering the president's agenda.
But that's faced a ton of criticism, right? The worry is it could lead to firings based on politics, replacing experienced people with loyalists.
Exactly.
And this Schedule F idea, it's not exactly brand new, is it? We've heard this talked about before, kind of in the context of Project 2025 and that broader policy planning.
That's a really important connection. Yes, reinstating Schedule F has been a goal for various conservative groups for a while now. They see it as necessary to, quote, align the bureaucracy with the president's goals.
But the critics.
Critics are deeply concerned. They worry it politicizes the civil service, erodes that nonpartisan expertise we rely on, and could just create chaos within government agencies. Project 2025 documents explicitly calls for this.
Right, it's a recurring theme. Okay, another big one. The executive order titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. That's a very direct title. It bars federal funds for gender-affirming care for minors. What exactly does this order do?
So it directs federal agencies to essentially stop medical institutions that get federal grants from providing certain types of gender-affirming care. That includes things like puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries for anyone under 19.
And it hits insurance, too.
Yeah, it impacts coverage through programs like TRICARE, the military health system, and federal employee health plans as well.
And this stance, particularly on care for minors, it lines up with a lot of the rhetoric we've heard from certain political groups and, again, ideas in Project 2025.
Yes, absolutely. There's a segment of political thought heavily reflected in Project 2025's materials that strongly opposes gender-affirming care for minors. This EO puts that view into federal policy.
But it's facing court challenges already.
It is, almost immediately. It's been temporarily blocked or limited by some federal courts. The legal arguments tend to revolve around equal protection, parental rights, things like that. Project 2025 specifically criticized this type of care and called for removing related guidance.
Okay. Then we also saw an executive order bringing back service members who were kicked out for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. They get their rank back. back pay.
Right, that reverses previous policy.
Yeah.
The discussion around that often touches on individual liberty versus, military readiness concerns. Project 2025 also recommended something similar.
And tied to the military, there's the ban on transgender individuals serving openly. Another reversal of a prior policy.
Yes.
The stated reasons focus on readiness, cohesion, medical costs.
The administration's argument is that allowing transgender service members impacts military standards, things like deployability, unit cohesion, medical requirements. They also raise the cost issue regarding gender-affirming care within the military system.
But there are groups pushing back hard on that.
Oh, absolutely. Advocacy groups like Sparta Pride, representing transgender service members, strongly dispute those claims. They point to the successful service records of transgender troops.
Yep.
And like the gender-affirming care order, this ban has also faced immediate legal challenges, mainly focusing on discrimination and equal protection grounds.
Okay, moving on slightly. A memo freezing federal civilian hiring. This seems linked to broader plans to shrink the federal workforce.
It does. It's presented as a first step towards reducing the size and the cost of the federal government, ostensibly to improve efficiency. We've seen attempts at workforce reduction before, with mixed results, and again, cutting the workforce is a major theme in Project 2025.
Then there was the withdrawal from the World Health Organization, the WHO, citing their handling of the pandemic. That was a big move.
A very big move. The administration argues the WHO mishandled the early days of COVID-19, and that withdrawal is necessary for U.S. interests and health sovereignty.
But health officials warned against it.
Yes, many public health experts warned this could really weaken global pandemic preparedness, coordination, that kind of thing. Project 2025 was also critical of the WHO.
We're also seeing troops deployed to the southern border for security.
Right, this reinforces that intense focus on border security, using military personnel to back up existing law enforcement.
Though their role is limited, right? Because of posse comitatus.
Generally, yes. The Posse Comitatus Act restricts using the military for domestic law enforcement, so they're usually in a support role, logistics, surveillance, things like that. But Project 2025 supported using the military even to directly prevent illegal crossings.
And related to that, a suspension of refugee admissions, again citing border security.
The given reason is that the border situation requires a pause, a temporary reduction, to make sure security screening and vetting processes for refugees are robust enough. Project 2025 also suggested right-sizing refugee intake due to border concerns.
And finally, on this immigration front, the move to end temporary protected status, TPS, for Haitians and Venezuelans.
TPS is that temporary status for people from countries deemed unsafe to return to.
And the administration wants to end those designations.
They're trying to terminate them, arguing the original conditions like natural disasters or civil strife no longer apply. Ending TPS, though, could have huge impacts on people who've lived and worked here legally for years under that status. Project 2025 explicitly called for repealing TPS designations.
So you definitely see a consistent thread through these executive actions, particularly on immigration and the workforce. Now let's look at the border itself. We're hearing about this major push to shut it down, a reported drop in southern border crossings, but also early raids, a PR blitz around deportations.
Yeah, border security has clearly been priority number one. They've rolled out various measures aiming to cut illegal immigration. That reported drop in crossings might show an initial effect, but, long-term trends and the wider impacts, still too early to tell for sure.
And it's not just at the border, is it? We've seen actions like revoking visas for foreign students involved in pro-Palestinian protests, and even detaining legal permanent residents. That seems like broadening the scope quite a bit.
It does suggest an expansion, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving beyond just those trying to cross without authorization, targeting students, legal residents, that's raised alarms about due process, First Amendment rights.
And then there's this really striking use of the Alien Enemies Act in 18th century law to deport Venezuelan migrants accused of being gang members, reportedly without normal due process.
That's drawn huge legal scrutiny, invoking a law usually associated with wartime in this context.
And judges from across the spectrum have pushed back.
Yes, judges appointed by presidents of both parties have raised serious concerns about the lack of due process. And the Supreme Court stepping in to halt some deportations and order the return of one individual, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, really underscores the judiciary flexing its muscles here.
Yeah, I saw the White House social media response to that Garcia ruling. It was pretty direct.
It was, and that response highlights this ongoing tension, doesn't it, between the executive branch and the courts over just how far presidential power goes, especially on immigration and using these older, more obscure statutes.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Government efficiency spending cuts. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. They announced some really ambitious cuts, like $160 billion.
Right. DOGE itself was a headline grabber, mandated to slash spending, cut regulations.
But there are questions about that $160 billion figure, aren't there? Reports of errors in their receipts.
There are significant questions. The claimed savings have met with a fair bit of skepticism, reports of inconsistencies in how they calculated things. So the actual impact on the federal budget, that needs a much closer look.
And alongside this, we've heard about major personnel changes. Nearly 280,000 firings and leaves across federal agencies. That's a massive number.
It's huge. Changes on that scale would absolutely have a ripple effect throughout the government. You have to wonder about the impact on agency operations, their ability to actually do their jobs, provide services.
And it looks like foreign aid took a huge hit. Reports of dismantling USA, the main agency for international development.
Yeah, that's been reported, along with deep cuts proposed for departments like education, the EPA, the CDC.
That represents a really fundamental shift in government priorities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If agencies like USA are dismantled and you see those kinds of cuts to education, environment, public health, that's a radical reshaping of the federal government's role, both domestically and internationally. The long-term consequences could be profound.
Then there was that memo from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that briefly froze grants, loans, federal assistance programs. It caused a lot of chaos.
It did cause considerable confusion. It was later rescinded, but some funding is apparently still paused because of court orders.
And OMB is key here. They manage the budget, implement the president's priorities.
Exactly. So that memo, even though short-lived, really signaled the administration's intent to get a tight grip on federal spending, review it, redirect it. The pushback and the court orders show just how complicated that can be, especially with unilateral executive actions impacting established programs. Project 2025 definitely envisioned OMB having this kind of central control over funding flows.
Let's talk tariffs. Big topic. We saw sweeping tariffs slapped on goods from allies Canada, Mexico, and adversaries like China, the EU. Steel, aluminum, cars. There was that initial 90-day pause announced, but then that got partially walked back. It seems kind of messy.
It's been very dynamic. The rollout of these broad tariffs marks a major shift in U.S. trade policy. The stated goals are, cutting trade deficits, boosting American industry. But the adjustments, the partial reversals, they reflect just how complex and potentially disruptive these measures are in a globalized economy.
And the trade tensions with China continue, this sort of bitter trade war with tit-for-tat tariffs. Economists seem worried.
Very worried. Many economists have raised red flags about the risk of recession, about instability in financial markets because of these escalating trade fights, especially with China. The retaliatory tariffs create a lot of uncertainty.
What are the long-term economic effects?
Still really unfolding, I'd say. But the concerns about negative impacts on growth, inflation, global markets, they're widespread.
Okay, let's pivot to another theme that's emerged. Retribution and the use of power against, perceived opponents. We're seeing reports of things like stripping security clearances, threats aimed at law firms that might oppose the administration, actions against news organizations, even targeting universities like Harvard with funding cuts.
Yeah, the pattern suggested by these reports is one of using the levers of presidential power against individuals, institutions, companies viewed as critics or obstacles.
People have drawn comparisons to Nixon's enemies list.
They have, though some observers suggest this feels maybe more systematic, more extensive than what was seen then. These actions inevitably raise serious concerns about potential abuse of power, chilling dissent.
And it seems tied to this broader assertion of presidential power, wanting to remove federal officials more easily, challenging past Supreme Court rulings like Humphrey's executor.
That's part of the context, yes. The idea that the president should have more direct control over the executive branch, including independent agencies. Challenging Humphrey's executor, which limits the president's power to fire certain officials, is a key goal mentioned in Project 2025 as well. It's part of a larger legal and constitutional argument about presidential authority.
And it's not just individuals being targeted, but specific entities, too. There's an executive order starting the process to dismantle the Department of Education.
Right, that aligns directly with a policy view also prominent in Project 2025, favoring a much smaller federal role in education, pushing power back to states and local districts.
Then another UD ending all diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs within the entire federal government.
This reflects the perspective that DEI initiatives can be divisive or lead to unfair treatment, that they conflict with equal opportunity principles. Again, Project 2025 called for dismantling the DEI apparatus and purging related terms from government.
What about FEMA, the disaster relief agency? There's talk of a review council shifting more responsibility to states, even denying aid in some recent disasters.
Yeah, the approach seems to be moving towards putting more onus on states and localities for disaster prep and response. This potentially changes the level of federal support people can expect after a disaster. Project 2025 also proposed reforming FEMA spending and shifting more costs to states.
Okay, and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is investigating NPR and PBS, public broadcasters.
Yes, an investigation initiated by Commissioner Brendan Carr into whether they've violated rules for non-commercial broadcasters. This signals scrutiny of these publicly funded outlets.
Which, again, connects to
Project 2025. It urged Congress to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and potentially reclassify NPR and PBS.
We're also seeing a proposed dismantling of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Big budget cuts, eliminating offices like the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, OAR.
This suggests a significant shift away from federal focus on climate and environmental science. NOAA is seen by some critics, including in Project 2025 documents, as a source of climate alarmism, so cutting its budget and research fits that perspective.
And the NIH, National Institutes of Health. A memo capping indirect costs for university research at 15%.
Right. Indirect costs are the overhead universities charge on grants to cover facilities, administration, etc. Capping them at 15% is meant to save federal money.
Does that connect anywhere?
Yes. Project 2025 specifically recommended capping indirect costs, suggesting they should be more in line with rates for private organizations.
And one more, an executive order enforcing disclosure of foreign gifts to universities.
This aims for more transparency about funding coming from foreign sources into higher education, addressing concerns about potential foreign influence. This is also a recommendation in Project 2025.
Wow. Okay, so you can really see the influence of that pre-planned agenda in so many of these actions. It's not just random.
No, there's a clear through line connecting many of these EOs and policy shifts back to that broader conservative policy project.
So, with all this happening at such a pace, how is the public reacting? Let's look at that Marist poll taken right at the 100-day mark.
Okay.
It shows, not great numbers for the administration, a plurality giving the president a failing grade, an F, overall job disapproval at 53%.
Yeah, those are tough numbers. A majority disapproving and a large chunk giving a failing grade suggests pretty significant public dissatisfaction early on.
And the approval ratings on specific issues, the economy, tariffs, foreign policy, immigration, they're all upside down. More disapprove than approve.
That indicates the dissatisfaction isn't just general, it's tied to key policy areas that the administration has been very active in.
There was also specific disapproval mentioned about the handling of that Kilmar Abrego Garcia deportation case we talked about.
Right, that specific incident seems to have resonated negatively with the public, likely tapping into those concerns about due process and how immigration enforcement is being handled.
The poll also found a slim majority thinking the country's heading in the wrong direction. And high percentage, I think it was around 40%, saying the president is moving too quickly.
That moving too quickly number is interesting. It suggests that even beyond agreement or disagreeing with the policies themselves, the sheer pace and volume of change might be unsettling for a lot of people.
And personally, nearly half of Americans in the poll said the president's policies have had a negative impact on them personally. And 6 in 10 believe current economic conditions are a result of these policies.
That's striking. It shows people are connecting these policy changes directly to their own lives and the economy. And for many, that connection is negative. It suggests the administration is being held responsible for the economic climate right now.
What about the tariffs? The poll asked about those specifically.
Yeah, a majority said they believe imposing tariffs actually hurts the U.S. economy.
So, despite the administration's arguments for them,
The public, or at least a majority in this poll, isn't buying it. They see tariffs as harmful overall.
maybe the most overwhelming number, though. 85% agreed that the president should obey federal court rulings.
That is a huge consensus. It really underscores a fundamental public belief in the rule of law. The judiciary's role is a check, even if they don't agree with every single court decision. It's particularly relevant given the tensions we discussed earlier.
And lastly, on public opinion, what about Elon Musk and DOG?
The poll found an unfavorable view of Musk, actually. And opinions on the Department of Government Efficiency itself were divided?
So Musk's involvement isn't necessarily seen positively, and the jury's still out on whether DOGE is a good idea.
Seems that way, based on this poll. The negative view of Musk might reflect reactions to his public profile or his perceived influence. The split on DOGE suggests people aren't universally convinced of its value yet.
Okay, so the polling paints this picture of a pretty divided country. Lots of concern about the direction things are headed after just 100 days. Now, what about the president himself? His rhetoric, his actions during this time? He held a rally, right? Celebrating the 100 days.
He did. He framed it as a period of, quote, unqualified success, and used it, as he often does, to attack critics, judges, Democrats.
And there was that video shown at the rally documenting deportations.
Yes, that was reported. It really highlights how central immigration enforcement is to his message and his appeal to his base, making it very visible.
He also dismissed the negative polls, didn't he? Said legitimate polls would show much higher number.
Right, claiming the unfavorable polls weren't accurate, and asserting that real polls would show strong approval. It's a familiar tactic.
And that line, nothing will stop me in pursuing his mission.
A very strong statement of resolve. It signals determination to push forward with his agenda, regardless of opposition or public opinion figures.
His first foreign trip, interestingly, was to the funeral of Pope Francis.
Yes, that was noted. A significant diplomatic event obviously carries symbolic weight.
There were also some other reports around that time. Lower than expected turnout at a rally in Michigan, people leaving early.
There were some reports like that, yeah. Which could hint at maybe enthusiasm levels, but it's hard to read too much into single event reports.
And this broader observation about a growing sense of fear among some Americans to even voice their political opinions, because the country feels so divided.
That's something commentators have noted, a potential chilling effect in this highly polarized environment, where people might just self-censor because the climate feels too hostile.
So let's try to wrap this up, bringing all these threads together from this deep dive into the first 100 days. Several key themes really stand out, don't they?
You really do.
We've seen this incredibly rapid, extensive use of executive actions, huge policy shifts across so many sectors, a confrontational stance towards the courts, perceived opponents,
A definite focus on government downsizing, trade protectionism.
and a public reaction that's clearly divided, showing a lot of concern, reflected in that polling data.
Yeah, you characterized it well. It's been a highly active, very assertive approach to governing right out of the gate, heavy reliance on executive power. And that initial public response, it shows deep divisions, anxieties about the direction, maybe the speed of it all.
And as that historian quote in one of the articles mentioned, these are enormous gambles. The long-term consequences are far from certain.
Absolutely. 100 days is just a snapshot, really.
Yeah.
The full impact of these decisions will play out over years, potentially decades.
So thinking about this historical benchmark, the 100 days, and everything we've just talked through, the sheer scope of action, the immediate impacts, what do you listening think are the most significant shifts? What are the potential long-term ramifications for the country?
It's a lot to consider.
It is. We encourage you to weigh the different perspectives we've covered and, of course, keep following these developments as this administration and the political landscape continues to evolve.